Hello, I'm John Ennis, and welcome to the first of our Twilight talks on design from Gayfield Creative Spaces. I welcome you also on behalf of Creative Scotland, co-sponsor with us of the Twilight Talks series. I'd particularly like to thank Helena Ward and Amanda Cato for their support. The last of our 6 talks on the 11th of September is in our own building just around the corner of Gayfield Square. I'm delighted to be working with 3 partner venues in this series, and in particular for 3 of our talks here at Lion and Turnbull. Around you tonight are some stunning pieces of applied art and design from Scotland. And in front of you tonight, it's my privilege to welcome 2 individuals who I believe are creating high-quality products that lies on the continuum of top-notch design in Scotland: Paul Simmons and Laura Spring. Tonight, Paul and Laura will talk to us about their work in creating thriving design studios, both in fact on the outskirts of Glasgow city centre. In the last 18 months, I've had the joy of travelling for a more in-depth survey of the design landscape in Scotland, in the UK, in Europe and in the States, to try and understand how we could add value in our own small way at our hub at Gayfield Creative Spaces around the corner. I spent much time in Glasgow, of course, and in London, and my instincts in seeking to collaborate early on with Laura Spring and Timorous Beasties have proven themselves correct during my travels and in the time since. Laura's work I've known for perhaps 3 years. For me, her textile designs are happy, clever, without being tricksy, and altogether very engaging. And Laura marries her skill in textile production with a fastidious creation of wonderful product. Laura Spring is a creative mind on a design trajectory that includes appealing product and wealth creation. Wealth creation is not a dirty turn of phrase. I'm interested in people who create microeconomies around the place in which they work to the benefit of their co-workers and their local communities. And I've seen Laura at work in Glasgow at Grey Grove Studios, and in London during Design Week in September, and at Christmas in the Truman Brewery in East London. And Laura really does work hard. Her displays at both London events were knockout, and the sales were there to match. Also in Glasgow is a design mecca for many in Scotland, myself included, the Timorous Beasties shop on Great Western Road, just a little way from their production studios in Anniesland. I'd like to say thanks to Angela Edison, who is unable to be here tonight, and who was very welcoming and happy to chat the first time I approached the team with a view to collaboration. Timorous Beasties barely need an introduction to anyone who loves textiles in Scotland. They're an international exemplar of good design. My travels took me to Vancouver, San Francisco, New York, Amsterdam, Barcelona, and Paris, talking to people, learning more about design, visiting small collaborative hubs like our own at Gayfield. Everyone knows Timorous Beasties, and their designs are celebrated worldwide. At one point, this reality almost came to haunt me. I went to use the bathroom at the Art Institute in Chicago. I paused and looked around, and I realised I was surrounded by Timorous Beasties wallpaper. That's how omnipresent I felt in the last little while. In addition to great designs, one clear factor unites both these designers, and that's quality. I can tell you from first-hand experience that nothing leaves the studios of Laura Spring and those of Timorous Beasties that isn't checked and cross-checked so that it's absolutely up to scratch. Quality all the way. And it's from microeconomic bases like those created by Laura Spring and Timorous Beasties that Scotland stands tall in the economic world of textile design. Thank you for coming, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Laura Spring and first Paul Simmons and Timorous Beasties.
Thank you, everyone. Well, just the basics. We run a very small, or we've started off in a very small way with a very basic way of manufacturing. So these are just some slides of our studio. The way that we hand print is, as I say, very, very basic. We started off with a 12-metre table and a 7-metre table. Now we have 2 20-metre tables. But still, quite a lot of what we do is not actually hand-printed. We have branched out into all sorts of things, which I'll go into over the course of this talk. But I just wanted to give you a feel of the kind of hand-printed qualities of the studio. So very much hands-on, quite literally. And the process itself is very, very simple, just like the silk screens of yesteryear. Same processes that I guess people like Andy Warhol used. But process is something that I'd quite like to talk about tonight as well. Starting off with the idea of textiles and printed textiles, and the idea of pushing ink through a screen. And that idea carried on through thinking about, well, does it need to be ink? Can it be varnish? Can it be paint? Can it be anything that's liquid? And what do you print onto? That can be anything as well. It can be textiles, obviously, but we've experimented with stone, wood, metal, all sorts of things. And one of the things we did early on was we got together with an architectural practice called Vitruvius, and they had a whole pile of old bits from shops and old buildings, and we got together with a designer called Martino Gemper, who's quite well known these days in the trade for, is the word upcycling? Is that what you call it? But he got together with another guy called Reiner. They went around loads of skips, got a whole bunch of stuff, and basically took apart loads of pieces of furniture and then put them back together again. And we got these old, this is a pair of old wooden shutters, and literally just printed straight onto them. Also, we had pieces of tavertine and bits of granite that were actually from some of the buildings that were blown up in Manchester City Centre by the IRA. Can't remember what year that was. And yeah, just yet again, just trying out different inks. We managed to actually print onto stone. These are some of the bits of furniture. Yet again, other materials. This is brick. This is actually a laser print. We tried working with materials that are quite cheap, and then trying to make them special. Unfortunately, I think these ended up, well, when we did the costings for these, they ended up about £60 a brick, so it wasn't really commercially viable. But the ideas were there, the idea of in textiles you have a brick repeat, so it kind of fell into the idea about having different scenes that joined up in on bricks. Stone, we sort of by accident got in with basically a guy that makes headstones for headstones for graves, and we started working with him and producing sort of one-off pieces actually, which were sandblasted onto stone, and we produced a sort of dinner set here. And then other materials, thinking about, with digital printing onto glass, used for an interior, onto the outside of a shop window. And yet again, some of the ideas from working with stone then went onto some buildings. I can't remember where this one is, but you can see, obviously, there's two guys there over in the far right. So quite large scale. And then even concrete. I quite like the idea of, we designed quite a lot of lace at one point. And the great thing about designing lace is that it's sort of the same process as working with the concrete. The process being, using Photoshop and having some of the designs in different layers. Different layers meaning different sort of thicknesses of lace. And it's the same kind of process, although these guys won't tell me how they actually make the concrete, but I think it's something along those lines, because they can get this brilliant detail which nobody else can do. I think they actually print it onto an acetate and then they pour the concrete out, and just the relief in the acetate they do something with. Anyway, I just quite like the contrast between the lace and concrete. There's some of our lace, which actually we produce with one of the last remaining lace manufacturers, not only in England but Scotland as well. Morton Boland and Son, who's one of the last Nottingham lace manufacturers. Talking about materials, the other thing, I guess, with working with materials, working with textiles, working with wallpaper, and trying to kind of work out where we stood when we first started out. And this is an image of what was around at the time, in the late 80s. And I guess what we're going to start talking about is taste. And these were the kinds of things that were on the market when we started up. And we just thought, you know what, you just got to give this a try. Yet again, different ways of looking at textiles and wallpaper and surface pattern. Also reflects the time. I always think that you can often see when a design was made just by looking at it. You can give you an idea of what kind of decade it kind of comes from. So, from the spiky 50s to the psychedelic 60s, to the geometric 70s and the awful 80s. You can sort of tell. And ways that people promote design as well, and we're promoting wallpaper. I mean, obviously these to us look completely ridiculous, but at the time, I guess they were sort of, in a way, cutting edge, believe it or not. Some actual Dutch company, well, there's a Dutch company called Mooi that sadly I don't have an image from, but recently they used models and people in some of their advertising, and actually it's quite interesting when you see some how actually sometimes things haven't changed, and maybe we'll be looking back at some of their adverts with the same sort of irony that we are now. I mean, transvestites in front of wallpaper dressed up in a big psychedelic kind of rainbow outfit, it's quite hilarious. So in terms of materials, when we first started out, we had a very basic way of manufacturing, which was handprint, and it was really trying to find a way of making that special. And by sheer accident, we started printing onto paper. The only reason being that it was cheap. We couldn't afford to print onto fabric, and I'd spent some time as a student working in a wallpaper factory, so we managed to get some old bales of paper from the factory, and really as a way of experimenting, started printing onto wallpaper. And this was at the time, I guess maybe 96, maybe it was the first Gulf War, and we did this series which was taken up by a magazine called View, which is no longer in existence, but it's a Dutch magazine, which was really a fantastic magazine that sort of was a sort of trend magazine sort of for forecasts. And we worked on these ideas of camouflage, which was, again, to do with pattern, breaking up images, tanks as flowers, camouflage as doves of peace, and suddenly started to get a bit of publicity. So these were some of the shots from the magazine. Stealth bombers as yin and yang, kind of love and hate. And then basically started producing our own hand-printed wallpapers. And I guess at the time there was nothing quite like it on the market. I mean, I often think that, maybe we're going to talk a little bit about taste and aesthetics. But sometimes, looking at the marketplace and finding out the gaps, the bits that were sort of missing. I remember talking to people at the time about, I was working on wallpaper, and you could sort of see their faces sort of fold up and kind of like disbelief. It had such a bad name for itself, wallpaper. And sometimes it's those gaps in the market that are really important and to look out for. And it's when things have become, I don't know how to kind of describe it in terms of, whether they've become in bad taste or certainly out of fashion through various reasons. I mean, I kind of thought at the time in the 80s, excuse me, and the 90s, wallpaper was just bad. It was bad quality, it was badly designed, and there was a huge gap. And that in turn generated quite a lot of publicity. We started getting, some of the wallpapers were used in different interiors. and in turn people could see how they were being used. The usage of wallpapers then changed as well. So rather than people having wallpaper absolutely everywhere and their curtains matching their paper and, you know, everything kind of being one big kind of mush, people were, you know, using it in much more concentrated ways, which meant they were spending less money on it and would be maybe more prepared to spend a little bit more on having less wallpaper. We're doing things as well like, you know, printing just varnishes, printing black on black, and things which weren't around at the time. Sometimes, you know, some of the designs were then used in adverts. This one's for Vivienne Westwood. Various interiors again. And then we started expanding in terms of wallpaper, using different processes, different materials. So this is a flock. Quick glass of water. This flock obviously had a kind of the idea for this design was to actually have a kind of devil's face within the design, so it's called a devil damask. And then, you know, marketing it in terms of packaging. As you stacked up the boxes, the design would also appear. And this is an example of how bad things were as well at the time. I mean, this is a great example of how aesthetics can really affect a material. So, you know, this is badly drawn. I think this is an old Coles paper from the 80s with a dog tied up to a sheep. I mean, I don't know how the hell they kind of came up with that idea. And yet again, you know, straight away you think cheap. It just looks cheap, yet the process is exactly the same. So aesthetics really affect how, you know, we perceive value. And I'm sure, you know, people that work in this building here will know all about that. Yet again, terrible drawing. This is supposed to be, I guess, a fisherman. Looks more like he's sort of, I don't know what he's doing to Casper the Ghost, something like that. I don't know. This woman's hand up here is like, I think it's probably only got 3 fingers, but, you know, just bad quality. This, on the other hand, is probably as good as it gets. This is a textile called Peacock Amongst the Ruins, produced in, I think, sort of 1770s, right about then. Copper plate engraving. It would probably take someone about a year just to carve the copper plate itself, partly because of the tools that were used had to be sharpened the whole time. And you still, even with the processes that we have these days, you cannot get the detail. The ink is kind of almost gathered in the grooves, and as it's printed, it almost gives the quality a sort of 3D feel. And this brought us on to, we're kind of known for some of the toiles that we did. Toiles being a kind of generic name for the type of textile that was designed firstly in that kind of late 18th century. Later on, the Victorians did toiles which were much tweer, but the early ones are really interesting, and we really didn't do much in terms of change the idea of the toile. And we started off with a Glasgow toile, and produced it not exactly in copper plate, but certainly tried to emulate the quality. I don't think the quality is there in terms of it being like a copper plate, but we sort of would do a number of drawings which were then printed on top of one another to then give it a kind of a quality that had a bit more depth about the actual drawing. And this progressed on to London toiles, actually, and used here at Waverley Station, and indeed for the festival in 2009, the Edinburgh toile. Oops. And indeed, yet again, for Beatrix Potter, for Penguin Books. It led on to all sorts of different commissions. And indeed, lots of different ways of working with different materials. You know, obviously, you actually trained as a textile designer, but ended up starting off with wallpaper. And, well, here we started working with carpets. Carpet manufacturer Brinton's, a very old company, one of the oldest in the land, but unfortunately been sold now. Used to be a family-run business. But yet again, trying to see carpet in a different way, rather than it being an all-over pattern, maybe just pattern in certain parts of the carpet. So people could use, pattern along a corridor and then have the carpet sort of disappear and be quite plain in some of the rooms in hotels. And what was quite funny was the the manufacturer actually just did it more as a PR event. I didn't think it would sell, but it was a huge hit. A lot of interior designers loved using it because it was very flexible. And I guess just what I'm trying to say about this way of thinking or designing is much more coming in from a different angle into into an industry which is very much absorbed in its own way of working, and just freeing it up in terms of making it work in a different way, and producing rugs as well. Now, digital, in terms of material and a process, is incredibly important at the moment. Very apt, very interesting, and changing, really changing the way that people are working. I kind of, obviously, I'm a big believer in designing for process. I'm very interested in learning how something is manufactured and designing for that. So when you're designing for something that's going to be hand printed, it's a very different way of thinking to the way that you'd maybe design something that's going to be digitally printed. And we found that there was a huge gap where a lot of manufacturers were using digital just to reproduce designs that they couldn't be bothered printing, or were too uncommercial to be printed, or maybe it was just a small run for an interior designer who just wanted something quite specific. And there's a big gap where people were not designing for it to be digitally printed. Also, manufacturing started to change, so that what was a way of realizing a prototype. So originally, a lot of digital printing was really just to sort of see how something might look on a fabric, or just to kind of see the colorings quite quickly. It wasn't actually a means to an end. Whereas now, digital is the actual final product. So I think it's kind of really changed a lot of things. And we sort of stand in between at the moment. I'm kind of very pro-digital, but as I'll show through some of these slides, it's not the be-all and end-all. But what was great about digital is that you can test the marketplace, you can produce designs very, very quickly, and really it opened up the floodgates in a way of just being able to take one image and just like this one with the bee, and just changing the wings and producing designs actually quite quickly. So this was just a themed wallpapers which were just based on bees. Some of the plus points about digital is that you can have as many colours as you want. Before, obviously, you'd have to have a separate screen for each colour, and it became not only lengthy but very expensive to produce something which had lots of colour in it. So these designs were specifically, done for digital, and really just took off. So this was the birds and the bees, kind of quite a traditional design, but impossible to print, in a hand printed way. Quite easy to do different colorings as well. Again, this is just how some of the ideas start. This is a kind of crossover between digital and hand print, so we'd get some things digitally made, some wallpapers digitally made, and then hand print on top. Again, all sorts of effects that you just wouldn't have been able to do any other way. This was a whole series based on sort of blotches and stains, sort of somewhere between a bed sit and some country pile. Again, And, another amazing, well, I'll go through some of the advantages of digital, which I think are quite phenomenal at the moment. One thing is you can have huge repeats, doesn't matter. So this is a good example of a design that just starts from bottom to top, so you can have these huge repeats. You can also take the process further and render your digital images into different interiors and kind of have a sort of sneak preview of how they might look. So all these images now, I'll probably show about 5 or 6, are all images that actually don't exist. So you can actually almost design something and you don't even have to manufacture it. You can then render it and then you can put it onto a website and it can exist in a virtual way. And I guess it only becomes a reality when someone actually orders it. So you can test the market as well. So it's a fantastic way of seeing how designs can work, how they're going to look, and the other amazing thing is that you have no stock as well. So you have the minimum order for a digital paper is 1 roll. So yeah, again, this doesn't exist. This doesn't exist. Neither does that. Neither does that. So it's it's just it's been kind of quite good fun working with all these. Now not only does it work for wallpaper, but it works for fabric as well. And those worked with different manufacturers, from lace and carpet and lampshades and stone and concrete. Actually kind of neglected fabric for a long time, which is actually what we originally intended on doing. So these are sort of examples of digital print onto fabric, which yet again, your best Swiss printer in the 90s could not produce something as good a quality as the digital fabrics that you can do now. These have been very successful. They're quite kind of over the top, but designing for process, working with making a mess, scanning the mess, working back into it, and sort of having some kind of control over the sort of the splatters and everything, and sort of creating, I guess you call them damask shapes. Damasks being a very generic pattern which probably originated in Damascus from rugs. So these are quite large. Yet again, getting old pieces of furniture and doing one-off pieces. A mixture of digital and hand print, so we sort of hand printed all the dribbles. I quite like the idea of having patterns which were already kind of stained and dribbly, so that partly because I've got kids now as well, so you get all the little paw marks everywhere. But I like things to be fresh and white as well. But just you don't have to be too precious with the furniture. So again, this is why it's quite nice coming along to Lion and Turnbull. I just buying up old pieces of furniture and then reimagining them. Again, then you started working with real manufacturers. This is an Urquhart couch, and this one as well, which has been very successful. And then right through to working with, this is some design work actually for Kate Bush. She's doing some gigs in September, so we've been working with her in terms of what she kind of wanted. She wanted a sort of actually a wallpaper, but it's turned out to be just a poster now. So it's sort of working with the idea of underwater and above water, and Two Worlds was the name of the original name of the tour. I think it's called something else now. So, but going right back, so I sort of talking about digital and working with digital materials, the downside to digital, there is a downside, and that is that you can't actually feel the ink. You can't actually print onto lots of materials. You have to work with the materials that the manufacturer already has, because of the process of the treatment of the fabric means that they have to have huge amounts of just plain cotton or linen, or but they still can't digitally do, sounds a bit of a rhyming slang there, but they can't digitally do metallics, varnishes, all sorts of things actually. So, we're finding that actually we're going back to hand print at the moment. This is an example of some hand-printed curtains where what's really nice is where you get the overlaps of the different inks, and they kind of create a sort of a denser ink, and you just get this sort of multiplicity of denseness, and it just kind of adds a kind of real weight to the fabric. Yet again, some other hand-printed curtains which were done for one of the courthouses in London. Yet again, you can't use certain fabrics. This was onto a really rough hessian, actually. And going right back, these are some of the very earliest pieces that we did, which was 100% coverage, hand-printed onto velvet. You could probably do this digitally now, but... finally, going way back to handmade paper, made with a Dutch gold leaf, and then hand printed with a glossy ink, and then a gold ink on top. So really going back to something which just cannot be done any other way than hand printed. There's absolutely no way you could produce this, and it has a quality about it. And obviously, this is just a slide, but when you actually see the real thing, you just kind of go, well, you know what, it is special, and it is something that you just couldn't do any other way. So that's my kind of talk, kind of run through what I think about material, or the materials that we've certainly worked with. I guess, our story is really about working with very simple means of ways of manufacturing, using quite simple materials, but to try and make something special. And at the same time, working with technology and designing for process is kind of what we're about. And in terms of seeing where we are in the market place, as it were, not really conscious. Sometimes things just happen by sheer accident. There's been a lot of luck in the way that we've ended up working, and sort of there's a slightly sort of laissez-faire attitude sometimes to the way things work out. But obviously, seeing how, where there's gaps in the market, and seeing just how to break through. I mean, the textile market in itself is quite a hard one to break into. It's very much sort of, monopolized by some of the big companies, and it's hard to sort of have your voice heard in that market. And so, hopefully, we've managed to do something like that over the years. So, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Laura Spring, and I'm going to talk to you basically a bit of an overview about my company. I'm kind of at the other end from Paul in that I've only been going 3 years, but we did meet scarily quite a long time ago. I graduated in 2002 from the art school in graphic design, which was great, but I graduated knowing I didn't want to be a graphic designer, so I just got in touch with Paul, and someone had mentioned their work, and I was like, yeah, I'll just go down there, and they let me in. And then our paths kind of haven't crossed for a while, and I spent quite a long time working in the theatre and film doing costume, and came back to print maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And I started my company here by accident, I'll confess. I was at a bit of a crossroads in my life, and I'd finished doing one company, and I wasn't really sure what to do, and the opportunity came up to apply to a place called Cove Park. And for those of you that don't know Cove Park, I've got nothing but amazing things to say about it. It's a really, really special place that is out in near Helensburgh on the Rossneath Peninsula, and they fund artist residencies. So you're there with writers, visual artists, all kinds of people. And I got this nice little place in the middle that I lived for 6 weeks, and it was called the Scottish Craft Residency. And the great thing about these residencies is that there's no expectation of you. You apply, you have a brief proposal, and you go and you make work. So I kind of went here after a bit of a weird time in my life, and I just started to make work, which was so lovely. And I had 6 weeks, and you get paid, which was even lovelier, because money is always a bit of a scary subject. But yeah, I got paid just to be in a space for 6 weeks. And I had all this work in me, and it just came out. And I was basically looking at a question about the relationship between print and the function of objects, and basically focusing on the weather. So this is all based on meteorological symbols. This was my lovely view out of my studio, which looks up, I can't remember the name of the lock, but it's basically the opposite side to Fast Lane. So it is really beautiful. And this is a print that I'm stuck with in a really great way, but I printed this by accident. And for any of you that make things, you know that sometimes the best things happen by mistake. And what I was trying to print was the lines, and it's just a really crude print with paper stencils because they don't have any printing facilities. So I kind of printed this by mistake and fell in love with it, and it's serving me pretty well. It's based on a wind chart, and it doesn't look anything like that now, but that's where it came from. And a really a weird thing, but a good thing, happened to me whilst I was at Cove Park. I'd made this suitcase in the middle, which was my wet weather suitcase, and it got seen by a journalist that I was in contact with in London. And she invited me to do a trade show in that September. And I told the first of a little white lie when she said, "Have you got a collection?" And I said, "Yes." And I had about 3 weeks to pull this out of the bag. And I made everything here myself because I'd been working in the theatre. I sort of honed my sewing skills. So off I went to London and did a trade show that I'd never done before. I didn't really know what to expect, and really luckily for me, I got a lot of interest in my work, mainly, bizarrely, from Japan. And it was where I first sort of learned to say no. And I can't sometimes explain to you why I've done things in my life, but I can tell you that it comes from my stomach. And I'll get a feeling and I'll say, no, I'm not doing that. And at this show, I got asked by a Japanese company if they could buy all my designs. And at first, it was kind of like, oh, money, amazing. And then I was just like, that doesn't feel right. So I said no. And luckily, I got asked back in the January to do a follow-on from that, which I said yes to. And I expanded my collection, but I was still making all of these things by myself. So I was screen printing and sewing, just everything. Hello. And I started to work a little bit with a manufacturer. This was my first sort of dipping my toe in the water, I guess, and getting some rucksacks made. The thing about my work is that I'd always got products in mind. So I was interested in screen printing, but they were always for a purpose. And then I went back. So basically, in 9 months, I did 3 trade shows. By this point in June, I felt like I had quite a lot of experience at trade shows, and I was getting a little bit overwhelmed because I was getting orders and I was printing everything, and I was making everything, and I kind of was tired, and luckily my husband didn't divorce me, but I didn't see anyone for quite a while, and so this was me. I was basically bent over my print table for most of the day, or bent over my unbelievable trusty Genome, which I have upgraded to a beautiful industrial machine now. But it wasn't really much fun because I was so tied up in production, and the thing that I loved to do was design and print. So luckily for me, like Paul says, there's a lot of luck in life. I saw an advert through the Cultural Enterprise Office in Glasgow, and they were advertising for this thing called Fashion Foundry, and I wasn't really sure if I was fashion. I'm kind of many things: fashion, craft, design. I can put on many hats. If someone's offering me money, I can put on, But anyway, because I'm hand printing and making, technically these are fashion accessories, I applied, and I'd say from Cove Park being one of the best things that I ever did, getting onto this was one of the best things I ever did, because it was an 18-month incubator, and I got mentored. And basically, I was just exhausted, completely and utterly exhausted. But I was selling my work, and so on the outside, it looked all really lovely, but on the inside, I was working a lot. So Fashion Foundry kind of helped me to just get rid of the fog and sort of take time and realize where the value in me was. And the sort of difference, a big difference between me and Paul, is that I make products, and some of these products are things like makeup bags, and makeup bags have a certain market value. I find about £20 hits the spot, and people will only pay that. So there's no value in me personally making all the makeup bag orders that I get. So I quickly, well, not so quickly, but over that next year, I started to split my range between screen print and digital, and started to outsource my work. And I kind of use digital in a slightly different way because of the products that I make. It's to allow me to have a very wholesalable range, and then I kind of keep the screen printing for my higher priced items or commissions. So working with Fashion Foundry basically helped me to restructure my entire company, and it's taken me, I'd say the last 18 months have been pretty interesting. But the first thing they said to me was, right, you've got to pick one thing, and what is it that you love to do? And I was kind of like, I love doing all, because I was doing so many things. I was teaching, I was doing commissions, I wanted to do residencies, and they said, well, what would you pick? And I was like, I don't really want to pick one. So I've probably made life difficult for myself, but this is how my company is. So I have products. This is from my latest collection that is launching to consumers this September, but it's already been released to trade in May. So I've been selling that already into shops. And these are the digital wash bags. And I'm now working with new materials, which is really great because, at first it was just me screen printing everything and working with materials I was kind of being pushed towards by the people I was working with, but I'm really interested in making really good quality products. So this has now got a wax cotton, these wash bags, and the bags that I make, I now have leather handles and wax cotton bases, and just having a bit more time and a bit more money allows you to experiment with this. And then, so the way I sell my work is, like John said, he came along to this show I did at the East London Design Show in London last Christmas. It was very cold, but we managed to soldier on, and it's a great show. It's in the Truman Brewery, and I find, for me, because the price point of my pieces are quite high, that London is a need. There is a market there, and I go there quite a lot to sell stuff. I do sell stuff all over the UK, but generally you find all the buyers, journalists, and people are in London, so you need to have a presence. And this was a trade show that I just did in May, and I launched this, just to the buyers. I also do exhibitions, and I'm very reluctant to kind of just become a bag lady, which is what some people call me. They're like, "Oh, you're the bag lady," but I actually enjoy all of this. So I got invited by Katie West, who obviously I have an ongoing relationship with now, and it was great because I've been looking into the weather and making all these prints. But when I print a bag, for example, for screen print, I'll only use one colour because I have to think about what that bag's going to retail for. With this exhibition, I got to go to the Science Museum in London, and I got a bit of funding from Creative Scotland to research more about the ways we record. It was wind in particular since the 1800s, and these were all kites that I recreated based on that and printing. And because they weren't products, I could really mess around with different colours and just different ways of printing and printing onto woods, because it was just an installation that it was going to be there and then it was gone. And with the assistance of a very great friend, I managed to recreate this Hargreave kite, and it is to the actual dimensions. They have the exact one in the Science Museum, but it's made out of like a waxed fabric. And I just went and photographed it and spoke to the archive people, and they were very helpful. And yeah, so we rebuilt it and hung it in there. Unfortunately, I had to smash it up because it was costing me so much money to transport it every time. But I have the other kites, but never mind. This was something I did recently. A friend of mine who's in the studio where I am did a show at GI, the Glasgow International, and she was asking people to do contributions. And this is why, for me, digital has really helped because it's freed up my time. I'm a very small studio. There's me. Cecilia works for me part-time, and I have a machinist that helps me out. So having more time means I get to do fun projects and play around with printing. So these were aprons that I made. They were doing a series of kiln firings, and they were asking artists to contribute. So people were making ceramics, and I said, "Oh, I'd like to make you a tabard." I've always had a thing about tabards, and so I made them. And then this is just a shot of me working in the studio on the India Street exhibition that's over at Gayfield just now. And I like to work, when I'm not making products, I like to work really basically with newsprint, and it's a one-off, and then the screen's gone, and that's it. So it was really nice to get to do that rather than constantly doing all these repeats. I'm not moaning about that, I'm just saying. And then, of course, John approached me as well to do, I feel a bit spoilt, to take part in both. It was the other way around. I got approached to this first and then the other one. But we had a conversation, and we both had a love of picnicking. I have a set 1970s trailer tent that I love, and he had a collection of picnic baskets. So John commissioned me to upcycle them, and it's just to do it in an exclusive colorway, which is nice because I don't normally print it like this, and I see it all the time as something else. So, yeah. Another strand to my company is I love to collaborate with people. I realised quite quickly that I don't always like working on my own. I like having my own thoughts, but I like people. So I collaborated with Laura, the girl I was talking about earlier, for a great thing called House of Voltaire in London, and it runs every other year by Studio Voltaire, and they commission different artists to make different products to raise money for the gallery. So this was the one we did 2 years ago, and it was just using Laura's fabric, which was digitally printed, and then my duffel bags, and then all the pockets are hand printed. And I'm working on something just now for their show that's coming up this year. I'm also, I'm not allowed to talk about it's not, it sounds really like I'm something special, but I'm not. But this is a company that approached me actually 2 years ago, and it's a brilliant idea actually. They're called Not Another Bill, and if you're ever stuck for buying a present, you basically subscribe. You can buy a subscription for 3, 6, I think 12 months. It's about £15 a month, I think. And the idea is that all we get now through the letterbox is bills. So you buy it as a present, and every month they get a surprise, and they work with different designers. And they approached me 2 years ago, I think at my second trade show, and the guy, Ned, is lovely. And I just said no, because I was too overwhelmed, and I just knew I couldn't cope with the volume. For him, we had to make 1,500 of a product, and at that time when I was sewing everything, it was just too much. So the great thing is now that, I can produce in volume because I'm working with a lovely local factory just outside Glasgow. I also love to teach, which I realised as well, because I like people, and I like teaching people how to screen print, because when they've never done it before, they always gasp when they lift up the screen, and I kind of remember that feeling, and it's really great to pass that on. And I run these classes once a month, and I'm always surprised that I've never had 2 bags the same. But yeah, I quite like Freddie, he was cool. And I also work on commissions. So again, you'll see Laura Aldridge pops up quite a lot, but we're friends, and I like her work, and she approached me and said, I'm doing this show, I want to make giant pockets, but I can't make them. And so basically, I just facilitated that for her. And a similar thing with this company in Glasgow called Goods, who I don't know if you're familiar with, but Tom and Brian, they are really good designers, and they were doing this at the London Design Show last year, and it's not my textile design, it's this guy Rory Crichton's, and they said, would I make this and make this blanket? And it was definitely a labour of love, but I'd never made a patchwork blanket before, and it's all quilted, but it was great, and I love the challenge of making something totally that I've never done before, because it feeds back into my work. And just this year, things have kind of I don't know why. I think if you show your face enough in London at certain things, then sometimes things click. But there's definitely been a shift this year, and out of the blue, I got a phone call from Lush, who are based down in Dorset, actually, and I think they're the nicest company I've ever worked with. They're not only are they really ethical, but they're just so lovely. And they said, would I design a bag for their shop? Apparently, Buchanan Street shop in Glasgow is their best-selling shop at Christmas. Or no, it's in the top 5 of the world. So they were moving to a bigger premises, and they liked the idea of a local designer working on a design. And this is kind of where I felt like I was back in my graphic design degree, because I had to pitch 3 ideas, and I haven't pitched 3 ideas since a crit in 2001 probably. And luckily they went with this one, because I realised afterwards that one of the designs I said I'd print would have been a nightmare. But they ordered 250 hand-printed from my studio, and then we did a licensing deal, which again has been brilliant, because I didn't know anything about licensing. I'd been to talks about it, but to get a licensing deal from Lush, who are so nice, was great, because they were just very honest with me, and I was honest with them about that I hadn't done this before, and so we came to a good agreement. And I learned I had to get a lawyer, and so now it was just a really brilliant experience. But printing 250 bags was quite epic, and that's Cecilia who helped me, but we were a bit exhausted after it. And this is the finished one. So these are a limited edition with a nice colour blend on the back that isn't available in the other ones. And that's my talk, and that's my dog. Thanks.
It's a chance for some Q&As from the floor, and also a chance to recharge your glass, have a look around, and maybe chat amongst ourselves. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
I've been to the shop in Glasgow, and it's tiny for the amount of work you did. I had no idea that you did all that.
Yeah.
Presumably then most of your business is online, it's more industrial rather than commercial, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, we just seem to kind of do everything a bit kind of haphazardly, and even the shop itself. Someone said, "Oh, I'll back you. I'll give you some money if you start a shop," which we did. We said, "Right, okay." This shop came up, and then the money didn't appear, and we actually wallpapered the outside of the shop for a few months, so we couldn't even open it. And so the shop kind of happened by accident, and you've got a shop now in London, which kind of happened by accident as well. But actually, the shop's doing very well. I mean, I kind of would have thought, like you maybe, that a lot of it is online. But certainly online has been great. It's a fantastic way to show your work, almost like a kind of portfolio, and obviously have things that are available online. But actually, we tend to find that people like to enjoy going into a place or having contact with someone, or looking at the actual real things. So, the shop in Glasgow's actually always done quite well. And the London shop is probably more what you'd call commercial in terms of, it's working more with hotels, or, because a lot of those kind of people are down in London, so it's more, I think it's by appointment only from Monday to Wednesday or something, it's going to be public, but the footfall is much smaller, in London. But, with all this talk of internet sales, which do happen, I'm not saying that our website doesn't do well, it does, but certainly I kind of find retail still quite strong. And I think, for talking again of the high street disappearing and all this kind of stuff, I remain quite kind of, well, actually, I think people enjoy the experience of going out and popping into a shop, maybe more than just taking the money.
But presumably it's the same as Laura, like feel the quality and see the detail, and you can't necessarily do that online, so you can't want to see the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of our business, I guess, business is also, like I was saying, the carpet manufacturer, that's probably, Laura was talking about licensing, deals or whatever, and what was quite funny, we've got a really great licensing deal because they didn't think it was going to sell, and then, £3 or £4 million later, so that was, it's been fantastic, it came at a time where, we really expanded at that point, because when we do get licensing deals, then, we're not having to do anything, really, once the design work's done, there's some ups and downs. So there's great things that can happen that way, or commission work. But like with Laura, sometimes you do loads of stuff for no money whatsoever, really, or you do it for the hell of it, because it's interesting. So it just kind of it's just kind of a bit kind of luck of the draw, really. Certainly, I don't know what the division would be in terms of. I'm not. I'm not that brilliant in arithmetic or anything. I just kind of judge things in terms of if it feels right. It's always work, and you get a kind of gut feeling about something. You just sort of think, well, like with the Twilight, people kind of sneer at that and kind of go, it's all right for a joke, but it will never work commercially. But done Twilights for vodka companies to there's loads of other things that kind of come from just doing stuff that I always find quite interesting. But the division probably is very basic in terms of a third of it is probably from London and the shop there, a third of it from the New Glasgow shop, and another third from other commissions as well.
Anyone else? I was going to ask about the licensing of the Lush bag. Does that mean that all the Lush outlets everywhere are now producing and now giving away these bags?
No, it's basically what happened was they approached me because it was specifically for Buchanan Street. So we had a 12-month licensing deal. So I printed 250 limited editions, and then they're allowed to print as many as they want in that 12 months, but just for Buchanan Street. And then it expires next April, and so depending on how well it's gone, if you want to come buy I want to do. Depending on how well it's gone, is about whether we renegotiate for it to go into other stores or it to go global, or just whether they want me to do other things with them. So it's just really like testing. But it's still great. I was very scared of licensing because I was a bit of a control freak and I've always found it hard to let go of the ways of my company. But you realise that if you want to sort of grow and do things you like, you have to start letting go. And as long as you do it the right way, I think getting a lawyer and making sure it was all going to be fine, then touch wood.
Well, I'd be amiss if I didn't say that speaking of shop hours and speaking of feeling the products, we've got an opportunity for everyone to see wonderful products from Timorous, Beasties and Timorous around at Gayfield Creative Spaces doing our summer exhibitions. So we're open from Thursday to Sunday from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. and I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to collaborate with both the teams here, and there's some examples of the work at the other side of the stage there. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to Creative Scotland, and thank you very much to Ryan and Turnbull. Hope you've enjoyed your evening and that we see you around at Gayfield in due course. Charge your glass and have a look around.